All right, so this Knife Thoughts video is going to be a review of this knife, and this is the Zero Tolerance 0707. And first off, this review is facilitated by River's Edge Cutlery. River's Edge Cutlery is doing a pass around of this knife, and it's something that I was able to take part in. And I've actually done a few pass rounds facilitated by River's Edge Cutlery in the past. I did a pass round of the Spyderco Native Chief and the Finch Runtley, and really something that I appreciate because, you know, we can't buy all the knives that we're interested in, or maybe you can, but I can't always buy every knife that I'm interested in. And sometimes it's really helpful to be able to get a look at a knife and review it, and then be able to pass it on to somebody else for the same opportunity. So I really do appreciate that River's Edge Cutlery does these pass rounds, and definitely check them out. But let's get right into it. First of all, this is an in-house ZT design. And as the name, if you're familiar with ZT's past designs, might clue you into, it is kind of a brother or cousin of the Zero Tolerance 0777. And the 0777 was a very, very popular model. It's now become highly sought after and has high secondary market prices. But this is similar in a lot of ways. The materials, kind of the design, but with a little bit of a design difference in that it is much slimmer. And that's one of the things that Zero Tolerance kind of advertises about this knife, is that it's the right size. So it's not super chunky, it's very slender, a nice 3.5 inch blade. So you get a good amount of edge, but it's not so big that it's going to be obtrusive in the pocket because it has this slender, what they call a drop point design on the blade, and a slender handle to go along with that. And I found that to be very much the case. This knife is very easy to carry, especially for being a 3.5 inch bladed knife. And it's kind of the first thing that most people you show this knife say, is they get it in their hand and they say, wow, it's light. And it is very light. So this is a full carbon fiber show side or mark side handle scale, and then the far side, or the lock side, is a full titanium. And they're both machined. Now, some of the machining is more for aesthetics than for weight reduction. You can see it has this really nice, I actually didn't even notice it at first, but this really nice lines machined into the chamfered edges of the handle. That's a nice touch because it goes, and you can see them here also, along with the other side. So both sides of the handle have that same machining pattern. And then both sides of the handle also have this cutout here around the pivot. Something that is an interesting look, not something that I necessarily like makes me like the knife more, I don't think, but it does probably reduce the weight a little bit. And then along with those cutouts, you can see that kind of continues, that machining continues down the handle, and you have a little bit of that on the butt end of the knife also. So it's a very lightweight knife, very easy to carry, and this deep carry pocket clip works really well. You can see that it's a very small clip, and I didn't really have any problems with that. It didn't really come out of my pocket or anything. I like to show knives like this that I'm reviewing to friends and family who aren't necessarily as into knives as I am. And interestingly, one of the things that was mentioned as being a big positive was this shorter clip. So my uncle actually said that he really doesn't like the long clips that cover up the lock and make it harder to get out of your pocket, he said. So interestingly, the shorter clip was something that some non-knife people really liked about this knife. For me, it works well. It's not obtrusive in the hand. It doesn't, you know, create any hot spots or anything like that. You can hold this knife, you can use it pretty solidly, and that's not really going to bother you too much. Now, one thing that I noticed about the construction of this knife, before we get to the main thing that probably people are wondering why I haven't mentioned, but one thing I noticed about the construction of this knife is, let's see if it'll focus a little better, these standoffs. And I actually was watching some other videos, reviews of this knife, and saw that it is mentioned. It's not just me imagining it, but these standoffs are asymmetrical actually. So you can kind of see that how one side has a little bit more space than the other. I didn't take this knife apart. I don't really take knives apart unless I have to, especially if it's, not a knife that is mine to own. So I didn't take it apart. I'm not sure what the purpose of that is, or even, what exactly the mechanism of them being, uneven like that is. But it is something that I saw, and I was like, wonder why that is. But anyway, they seem to be asymmetrical. They don't, the fact that they are asymmetrical doesn't seem to affect, the construction itself, the mechanics of the knife. It flips perfectly. It has no blade play at all, even when unlocked, and it is perfectly centered. Now, of course, this came to me from someone else, not directly from ZT or River's Edge Cutlery. So it's, something where it probably did come like that from ZT. I'm not 100% sure that it did, but it doesn't seem like this asymmetrical standoff really affects anything mechanically. Now, one thing that does affect things mechanically, and one of the big features of this knife, is the zero tolerance tune detent system. So this TDS, the tune detent system, is something that has actually been on some other Kershaw knives, but I believe this is the first zero tolerance knife to have the TDS. And what it is it's basically, rather than the detent ball on the lock bar being the functional detent ball, there's a second spring put into this side, the show side of the handle, with a detent ball, and that is the detent ball that actually sits down into a hole on the blade. So there is actually a detent ball on the spring. You can see it. You can see that the spring sits off of the blade. But the purpose of that is not to create the detent for the opening action, but rather just to keep this lock bar spring from scraping along the blade. So there's not actually a hole or divot drilled into this side of the blade for this detent ball to sit into, but there is on this side. So this side spring with this detent ball actually sits into a little hole or divot and forms the mechanical detent. And what this does is it allows them to apparently adjust it a little bit more. Adjusting the spring tension of this spring will not have to affect the lockup, right? They can make the lockup however they want it, which is about 50% on this knife, without affecting the detent. And that's something that sometimes people like. They'll have a knife that the lockup is, too far across, but it has a good detent, or vice versa. The other thing that this tune detent system does is that it makes it so that pressure on the lock bar doesn't affect opening. So a lot of knives have a problem, a lot of frame lock knives specifically, where if you hold the knife, in a certain way where you're putting pressure on the lock bar like I am right now, it makes it very difficult to open the knife. Now, this is not a problem that I have had on this knife, but this is just the frame lock I have out right now. And it doesn't seem to be a huge problem on this knife, to be honest. I can put pressure down and still get the blade out. But it has been a problem that I've had on other knives, specifically the Kershaw bare knuckle, which actually has a relatively similar design to this knife. It's slender, a little bit different handle and blade shape, but relatively similar design, and I really, really liked, but had a lot of trouble for me with how my hands are, putting pressure on that lock bar and making it difficult to open the knife. So for me, I really do appreciate that aspect of the TDS. So you can put as much pressure as you want on this lock bar, and it doesn't affect the opening. It doesn't make it more difficult to open whatsoever. Now it will, if you're continuing to put pressure, force this lock bar farther across, as you can see. But that doesn't seem to be permanent or affect anything. So I do like that aspect of the TDS, or tune detent system. Now, one interesting thing is that it's not necessarily a completely new innovation. Actually, Emerson knives have had a detent on both the lock bar and the other side for a long, long time. But the difference is that on the Emersons, both sides have a hole in the blade for the detent ball to sit into. So there aren't too many frame lock Emersons. Most of them are, maybe there are, but the ones I've had have been liner locks, so you can't put pressure on the lock bar anyway. But the nice thing about this tune detent system, and really the new thing about it, is that the knife doesn't have the hole on the lock side, so that it stops that problem or nullifies that problem of putting too much pressure on the lock bar, making the knife difficult to open. So it's an interesting design or mechanism, and I think that on some knives it's something that will be very appreciated. So real quick, I wanted to give a couple comparisons for this knife, the ZT0707, compared to some other knives you might be familiar with. So first off, which I'll show elsewhere in the video, is the ZT0561, a knife that a lot of people have had, and it's a really good knife, a knife I like a lot, and a significantly bigger knife than the ZT0707. So there's that. Then we have a Benchmade full-size griptilian, similar in length, maybe even slightly shorter on the griptilian, but significantly wider and taller. And I'll give you a quick blade comparison on those. About the same edge. And then a Spyderco Endura. So there's the Endura. The Endura actually, I would say, has a similar length handle, about the same edge. Roughly, yeah, maybe a little bit more edge actually on the Endura. And a little bit longer handle actually. But relatively similar actually in size. The Endura feels, I'm not sure which is actually heavier, but the Endura feels a little bit heavier. And then finally an Ontario Rat 1. So this is the larger version of the Ontario Rat. As you can see, the handle is a little bit longer on the Rat, and the blade is longer also, but in general a bigger knife than the ZT, although the edge difference is not huge. It's relatively similar in edge length. So that's just a few comparisons to give you a better idea of the size of this knife in comparison to some others that you might be more familiar with. So overall, what do I think about the knife itself beyond the design and that tune detent system? I have enjoyed it. It is nice in the sense that you do get a nice long edge, solid 3.5 inches of edge. It has a very acute usable tip, a little bit of kind of gradual belly, but a good amount of edge in general. And it seems to slice really well. I cut some cardboard with this, and it seems to be ground relatively thin for a modern type knife. So I've enjoyed using it. Like I said, I enjoyed carrying it with this clip, and I think that it's a good looking knife. Like I say, I think the thing I like least about the look of this knife is actually this see-through pivot. It's not terrible. I just, it's not something that I love. But I like the look of the blade shape. I think that it's a nice kind of maybe almost futuristic type look, I guess, with the carbon fiber and the milling and this kind of angular type turns in the handle where they come to a point rather than just being completely curved. And I do think it looks good. I've enjoyed carrying it, and it's worked well in my use. This knife has USA CPM, well, it's CPM 20 CV steel, and well, it's serial number 29. Didn't even see that until now, but has CPM 20 CV steel. I have used CPM 20 CV in the past. It seems to be a really good steel. Now this knife, and I don't know who had this before me, so I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus, but it came with a little bit of a messed up edge. There's the tip was rather blunted, and there's some chip outs along the edge. I was able to get most of the chips out, and I was able to get the tip back to pretty acute there, but not 100% of the chips. But it didn't really affect anything. I found the steel to hold an edge well, even with cardboard cutting and stuff like that. So overall, I think it's a really nice knife. It's a knife that costs about $250, $248. So depending on whether you have to pay for shipping or not, it might be around 250 or so. Um, really in with the other, the price range of other knives with these features and construction. So it's made in the USA. It has a full carbon fiber, show side scale. It's a titanium frame lock. It has a high quality steel, 20 CV, and it's a zero tolerance, which, they're generally in that price range. If that's a price range and a kind of value equation that works well for you in general, I think this is also going to be a really great value for you. It's something where you get that nice long edge, but in a slender package, especially compared to something like what I am used to from ZT, which is the ZT-0561. Now, I know that ZT has kind of for a while now actually been moving more towards this type of knife. So less of the big, heavy, chunky, what you might call a hard use knife like this Hinderer designed, again, ZT-0561. They've been moving away from that for a while. They've had some knives even considerably smaller than this knife, like the ZT-022 or 0022 or whatever it is. So it's not necessarily new that they're making a smaller, lighter knife like this. To me, from what I've had of ZT, the mostly Hinderer designs, it is new. And I think if you're looking for a hard use knife, this really isn't it. Not that it can't hold up to what you really actually are going to use a knife for, but it's not a super heavy duty feeling knife. It, like I say, the lock bar, can be pushed across some. It's just your typical frame lock. So frame locks aren't the strongest lock. They have a little bit of added security when you're holding the knife like this. But the blade is, relatively slender, so it's not going to be the strongest blade in the world. Just not necessarily a great hard use knife. But I don't think as many people are looking for that now as they were, maybe a few years ago when the ZT Hinderer designs were coming out. And I think a lot of people do want a really nice, well-made, good-looking, but useful knife that isn't going to be difficult to carry and is going to, get the cutting tasks that they need to do done. And I think that this is a good option for that. So if it's something that you're interested in, like I said, check out River's Edge Cutlery. They do have this knife, and they are responsible for me being able to review it. So please check them out. Let them know that you heard about it from me. And as always, please like this video, subscribe to my channel, and hit the bell for notifications if you like what you're seeing, if you like this type of video. I've got lots more like it, so you can check out my past videos also. I also post on Instagram, Facebook, everything like that, all at Knife Thoughts. And I have a blog where I write articles on knives like this and knife topics. So check out knifethoughts.com. And as always, don't forget to go out and do good.